The man had his gun pointed at my chest and his HOA badge in the other. Only one of them was real, and I wasn't sure which scared me more. That was the moment everything flipped. Before the sirens, before the agents rolled in, and way before Doug realized the kind of man he just threatened, I was standing in my own backyard wondering how a power-tripping neighbor got the idea that cosplay law enforcement was a good weekend hobby. It started, as most disasters do, with someone who thought a clipboard gave them authority and a gun made them God. 12 hours earlier, the sun had barely crested over the hills when I was already outside, fixing the rusted hinges on my workshop gate. The dogs were calm, birds chirping, and my only concern was whether I needed more welding rods. That peace shattered when a metallic blue SUV pulled up, window rolled down with the slow drama of someone trying too hard to look official. Out stepped Doug. Mid-40s, potbelly barely contained in a tight khaki tactical shirt, sunglasses too dark for the morning, and a laminated badge clipped to his belt that said, HOA Enforcement Officer, in Comic Sans. He looked like a man playing dress-up with authority he didn't actually have. "You the property owner?" he asked, without so much as a greeting. I nodded cautiously, wiping my hands on a rag. "That's right. Something wrong?" Doug squinted like he was peering through decades of law school. "Got a complaint about a trailer parked illegally. That gravel shoulders public utility access. You're in violation." I glanced at the flatbed trailer sitting in plain sight on my own land, next to a fence I personally welded. "That's not public anything," I replied calmly. "This land isn't under any HOA, and this shoulder's part of my easement. Check the plat map." Doug didn't like that. He muttered something about how he'd seen this before, and jotted fake notes like he was prepping for court. Then he straightened his little badge and said, "You might want to cooperate before this escalates. Noncompliance has consequences." I blinked. "Did you just threaten me with pretend citations?" "No, sir. I'm just doing my duty." His SUV peeled away like he just solved a major crime. I stood there for a moment, dumbfounded. It wasn't the first time we'd had HOA weirdos, but usually they stayed in their lanes. This guy was different. He wanted control, and not in the way a nosy neighbor nags about fence height. Doug thought he had jurisdiction, and he was going to invent reasons to enforce it. That evening, I installed a new set of trail cameras around the perimeter, and texted a friend of mine in the bureau. "Just a heads up," I said. "Some lunatics pretending to be law enforcement again. Not the first time I've seen it in rural counties, but this one's unusually confident." He replied instantly. "Send me footage if he comes back." He did. Oh, he did. Next morning, I woke up to my mailbox creaking in the wind. Except it wasn't the wind. There, flapping under a strip of tape, was a red-tinted notice that read, "Violation fee, $1,200, subject to immediate action." At the bottom was Doug's signature and the seal of the fictitious Crescent Valley HOA Patrol. We didn't even live in a place called Crescent Valley. That was 4 miles south. I chuckled, crumpled the paper, and fired up my coffee pot. Later that day, Doug returned. But he wasn't alone this time. He brought a buddy, late 20s, wearing what looked like an old security uniform from a shopping mall and sunglasses big enough to cover his whole forehead. They stepped out of their truck slowly, like it was some cop show intro. Their pickup now had a magnetic sticker slapped on the door that read, "Neighborhood Patrol Division." The cherry on top? Red and blue lights mounted on the roof. Cheap ones, the kind you get online for under $50. They strutted up the gravel like they owned the land. I met them halfway down the drive. "You're back," I said dryly. "I was starting to miss you." Doug tried the official voice again. "We've issued a notice. You have until sundown to comply or further action will be taken." I crossed my arms. "And what might that action be?" He paused, eyes flicking toward his buddy, who stood awkwardly holding a manila folder. Then, in a sudden burst of frustrated ego, Doug stepped forward and reached for the gate. "We're inspecting the easement. You touch that gate," I warned, "and we're going to have a different kind of problem." And then it happened. Doug pulled back, slid his jacket to the side, and withdrew a pistol, shiny, slightly shaking in his grip, aimed square at me. His badge hand trembled just as much, and for a second, I didn't know which one he thought gave him more power. "You're threatening a federal property owner with a firearm?" I asked, steady but sharp. "You sure that's the hill you want to die on, Officer Doug?" Doug hesitated. Just then, I tapped my phone screen in my back pocket. Silent alert. My trail cams were already feeding everything to cloud storage. More importantly, I'd sent the clip to that friend of mine, who happened to be less than 15 minutes away with a bureau team on a separate case. He told me, if it ever gets real, let me know. Doug kept the gun trained on me, still pretending he was in control. His partner stood frozen, realizing this wasn't part of the game anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for anything. I just watched Doug sweat, wondering how deep this rabbit hole went. And then, in the distance, came the whine of engines. Black SUVs tore around the bend like a scene from a government takedown, tires slicing into gravel, unmarked but not anonymous. Doug's expression cracked as soon as the doors opened and suits started stepping out, fast and unflinching. One of them yelled, "Drop the weapon!" Another flashed a badge that didn't come from a printer. Doug's gun hit the dirt before his knees did. His partner put his hands up so fast he nearly threw out his shoulder. I didn't say a word. I just stepped back and let the real law handle the wannabes. Doug had picked the wrong property to patrol. And now, he was about to find out what happens when you impersonate authority on the land of a man who's spent most of his adult life advising the people who actually have it. The moment Doug's knees hit the gravel, everything went silent. It wasn't the peace of resolution, it was the stunned, awkward quiet that follows a man realizing he's just ruined his life. The FBI agents moved fast. One cuffed Doug without a word. Another retrieved the pistol he dropped, inspecting it like he couldn't quite believe what he was holding. Doug's partner, the one with the oversized sunglasses and confused expression, stood with both hands up like he was surrendering in a cartoon. An agent approached him cautiously, weapon drawn, but it quickly became clear the guy had no clue what he was involved in. He stammered something about being just a buddy from the mechanic shop, and how Doug told him it was all community service. The agent gave him a sharp look, then made him sit on the tailgate of their truck while they sorted everything out. I watched it unfold from the porch, arms folded, heart rate finally beginning to settle. The lead agent, a tall man with a quiet demeanor and sharp eyes, walked up to me and nodded like we were old friends. We weren't exactly, but we had crossed paths enough over the years. I had done some training sessions and situational consulting with federal agencies before retiring into ranch life. I'd never needed to call in a favor, until now. He asked if I was okay, if anyone had been hurt. I shook my head and told him the whole thing had been escalating for days, starting with fake citations, moving into trespassing, and finally culminating in a firearm being drawn on me over a gate dispute. His jaw tightened slightly at that last part. Then he asked to see the trail cam footage I'd referenced in my alert. I handed him my phone, pulled up the live stream and archives, and let him scroll through it all. The quality was good, clear enough to see Doug's shaky hands, the moment he drew the weapon, and even his badge, which now looked like it had been laminated at an office supply store. The agent whistled quietly under his breath. He tapped a button to share the files to their evidence folder and nodded. "This is more than impersonation," he said. "We've been tracking this guy. Didn't realize he'd gotten this bold." That caught my attention. Tracking him? He explained that Doug had already been reported in 3 nearby counties for doing similar things. Showing up to properties with fake violations, issuing bogus tickets, trying to intimidate homeowners into paying fees to a fake HOA that didn't legally exist. The FBI hadn't yet intervened because most reports were scattered, weakly documented, or dismissed as civil disputes. But this was on camera. With a weapon. On land he had no right to be on. And the federal response was justified by the fact that Doug impersonated a law enforcement figure while armed, on private land owned by a federal advisor. I asked what kind of charges that would amount to. The agent didn't hesitate. Impersonating a federal officer, criminal trespassing, brandishing a weapon during commission of a crime, attempted coercion under false authority, and probably a few more once we dig through his truck. They did exactly that. Within 15 minutes, another agent popped the tailgate and started pulling out more props. Badges, fake parking tickets, a clipboard with pre-filled HOA violations, most of them completely absurd. One said, excessive birdhouse height. Another listed, unlicensed ATV decor. But tucked in the back of the folder was something worse. Printed maps. Marked plots. Notations. It looked like Doug had been scouting other properties, making lists of vulnerable homeowners. Elderly names were circled. Some had dollar signs written next to them. The whole thing reeked of a small-time con artist who thought intimidation was easier than actual work. Meanwhile, Doug sat in the back of the SUV with the door open and two agents flanking him. He looked smaller now. Like all the puffed-up confidence and fake authority had drained out of him the second a real badge showed up. He tried to explain himself, but nothing he said made it better. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, he insisted, over and over. You people don't know what kind of crime goes on out here. Someone's gotta keep order. The agent next to me rolled his eyes. And that someone's you? With a badge from your printer and a gun you barely know how to hold? Doug mumbled something about doing the job no one else would do. Then his eyes met mine through the SUV window. He didn't look angry. He looked confused. Like he couldn't understand why I wasn't scared of him. Maybe it was the years I spent helping train people who actually understood law enforcement. Or maybe it was just the fact that I'd smelled a coward the moment he tried to bluff his way into my workshop. Either way, I wasn't the one wearing cuffs. His so-called partner was let off with a warning. They ran his ID, found nothing suspicious, and determined he was just a gullible friend who liked the idea of playing cop on the weekend. Still, he was told if they saw him wearing anything resembling a uniform again, he'd be facing obstruction charges. The team spent another half-hour collecting every piece of fake gear Doug had used. They took photos of the phony badge, the gun's serial number, and the ridiculous HOA logos he'd designed himself. Then they packed up, thanked me for my cooperation, and assured me they'd keep me posted on the charges. Before leaving, the lead agent turned to me and asked a simple question. You want to press additional charges? I didn't answer right away. I thought about it. Thought about how Doug had walked up to me with a gun, how he tried to assert control over land he had no right to touch, how he probably thought he could scare me into submission. I remembered that look in his eyes when the feds rolled up, how fast fake authority collapses when real authority arrives. I nodded. Absolutely, I said. Every charge you can stack. Let him explain all of it to a judge. As the last SUV rolled away, dust trailing behind like a scene from a movie, I stood in the driveway alone again. The wind had picked up. Somewhere in the trees, birds called out like nothing had happened. But something had. Doug had picked the wrong man, the wrong property, and the wrong uniform to imitate. And the worst part for him wasn't the charges or the cameras or the SUV ride. It was knowing he'd never actually been in charge at all. The next morning, the story broke faster than I expected. By the time I poured my coffee and opened the local news site, Doug's mugshot was already posted on the homepage with the headline, Fake HOA cop draws gun on ranch owner. FBI arrests him on the spot. Below that was a still frame taken from my trail cam footage, showing Doug mid-lunge, arm extended, pistol in hand like he was starring in a low-budget crime show. It was surreal. My quiet little ranch, usually only visited by cows and delivery drivers, had turned into a headline, a cautionary tale, and a viral sensation all in 24 hours. The article didn't just tell the story, it roasted him. It mentioned the fake citations, the makeshift patrol truck, and the fact that Doug had been impersonating an authority figure across multiple counties. It even referenced his fake HOA group, Crescent Valley Patrol, calling it An invented organization with no legal basis, no jurisdiction, and no credibility. That line made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The comments section was brutal, with strangers calling him everything from dollar store sheriff to tactical Todd. Someone had even dug up an old photo from his Facebook profile where he posed in front of a whiteboard labeled Neighborhood Crisis Protocol. The internet was not going to let him live this down. The phone calls started shortly after. Friends, neighbors, even a few folks from way back during my consulting years. Everyone wanted to know if the story was real, if it was really me in the footage, and if Doug had actually pulled a gun over a trailer. I confirmed the basics but didn't go into detail. There was no need. The footage spoke louder than I ever could. A few local ranchers stopped by in person just to shake my hand. One of them, a guy named Roy who lived a few miles north, said Doug had tried to fine him for having unauthorized fencing upgrades a few months back. He hadn't taken it seriously, until now. Turns out Doug had a reputation, but no one knew what to do about him until he finally made the mistake of threatening the wrong man. That afternoon, the sheriff's office called. They let me know Doug was being held without bail until the arraignment. His charges were stacking up, and the federal prosecutor was already preparing to make an example out of him. They didn't want this kind of impersonation escalating in other counties. Apparently, a handful of similar cases had popped up nationwide, and Doug's arrest had given them a perfect opportunity to shut one of them down with authority. While that process rolled forward, I met with a civil attorney. It wasn't just about revenge. I wanted restitution. Doug had stepped onto my land without permission, tampered with my gate, drawn a weapon on me, and caused emotional and financial damage. My workshop had to be shut down for 2 days, deliveries rerouted, and my wife hadn't slept properly since the incident. I didn't care if he had a dime to his name. I wanted the lawsuit filed on principle. The lawyer didn't hesitate. With the criminal evidence and federal involvement, it was going to be the easiest case he'd handled all year. A week later, I got a call from a local news anchor asking if I'd appear for an interview. I declined the on-camera invite but agreed to a voice-only segment. I didn't want to be the face of HOA resistance, but I also didn't want other people thinking they had to stay quiet when confronted by these fake authority types. During the interview, I said one thing that stuck with people. Authority isn't what you wear on your belt. It's what you're given by law and how you use it. And if you abuse it, real authority will find you. That line got quoted everywhere. Reddit, Facebook, even a few law enforcement training blogs. I was surprised how many people had dealt with someone like Doug. Then came the court hearing. Doug looked rough. The suit didn't fit, his hair was greasy, and he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. When the charges were read, he winced with every new line. Impersonation. Trespassing. Brandishing a weapon. Attempted coercion. Fraud. It went on for over 10 minutes. His lawyer tried to argue that Doug genuinely believed he was helping his community, and that he'd never intended to cause harm. The judge wasn't moved. She looked at him and said, "Sir, the only thing you were helping was your fantasy of control. And now you're going to face reality." Doug pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. 18 months in county lockup, 5 years probation, and over $25,000 in fines and restitution. Most of that money was earmarked for the people he'd harassed, myself included. He had to forfeit his weapons and was banned from holding any enforcement-related position, public or private, for life. The best part? The judge added mandatory psychological counseling and community service, real community service, not his pretend patrols. A few days later, I had a plaque made. It hangs in my workshop now, right above the main entrance. Laser-etched in dark walnut it reads, "Neighborhood security provided by reality and cameras, not costumes and clipboards." Most people don't notice it unless they look close. But the ones who do usually smile. The land has been quiet ever since. The fake citations stopped. No more strange trucks with flashing dollar store lights. The new neighbors know the story, of course. Word travels fast in rural places. One of them even joked that they checked the property lines 3 times before planting anything, just to make sure the FBI wouldn't show up again. I laughed and told them not to worry. Doug wasn't coming back. And if anyone else ever got the same bright idea, they'd find the same welcome party waiting. What started as a ridiculous situation with a self-appointed enforcer turned into a lesson for every HOA tyrant and fake cop wannabe within a 100-mile radius. You don't mess with someone's property, especially when you don't know who you're messing with. You don't wave a gun and a badge unless you've earned both. And above all, you never, ever forget that there's a difference between pretending to be in charge and being the one who makes the call when it all goes sideways. Doug forgot that. And now, every time someone searches his name online, they're reminded of exactly how fast a badge made of paper can burn under the weight of real justice.